black belt stepped over the chain and mocked the dead. "This isn't guarding," he said. "It's cosplay for a crowd." Then he kicked the tomb guard in the face. A sickening crack. Blood. The guard didn't even blink. For a full second, he stood still. Then he broke protocol. And when he finally did move, let's just say the black belt stopped talking and stopped standing. Want to know what happened next? Then hit subscribe and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's begin. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as tourists began gathering along the ceremonial barriers. The air held that peculiar weight of reverence that settles over sacred ground. Even the children seemed to lower their voices instinctively as they approached the tomb of the unknown soldier. Among the respectful crowd stood Marcus Kane, and he definitely wasn't there to pay his respects. At 29, Marcus had built his reputation as one of California's most successful martial arts instructors, with 4 championship titles and a growing chain of elite combat schools. His fitted athletic wear and confident posture set him apart from the quiet families and veterans around him. The logo on his compression shirt read, "Kane Combat Systems, where champions are made." "This is what they call elite?" Marcus muttered to his phone's camera, keeping his voice low but audible enough for his live stream. "I've got guys in my beginner classes who'd make better security than this." The 3 men surrounding Marcus, his assistant instructors and devoted followers, nodded in agreement. They formed a loose semicircle around their leader, their matching team shirts identifying them as part of Kane's inner circle. These weren't casual students, they were black belts themselves. Men who'd followed Marcus from tournament to tournament, watching him dominate opponents across 3 weight classes. "Remember that military guy who challenged you in Vegas?" one of them whispered, grinning. "What was his name? Rodriguez? Lasted maybe 2 minutes before you put him on his back." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he studied Staff Sergeant Micah Rowan, whose dress blue uniform and white gloves stood in stark contrast to Marcus's world of cage fights and championship belts. At 31, Rowan had served with distinction for 9 years, though nothing in his ceremonial bearing revealed the 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, or the Bronze Star that sat quietly in a drawer back home. "Look at that stance," Marcus observed, his voice carrying the professional assessment of someone who'd studied combat for years. "Completely static, no awareness of surroundings, no defensive positioning whatsoever." He rolled his shoulders, the movement revealing muscles sculpted by thousands of hours of training. All that ceremonial nonsense would get him destroyed in any real confrontation. Nearby, retired Master Sergeant David Chen paused during his morning visit to his brother's grave. At 54, Chen had spent 32 years in the Army, including 8 years training the very guards who now stood watch. His weathered face registered concern as he observed Marcus's demeanor, recognizing the unmistakable signs of a predator sizing up prey. "I mean, seriously," Marcus continued, addressing his phone screen with the practiced ease of someone comfortable performing for an audience. "We're looking at the pinnacle of American military tradition here, and they've got guys standing around like mannequins. In my world, if you can't adapt, you get eliminated." Marcus began pacing slowly along the barrier, analyzing Rowan's form with the critical eye of a professional fighter. "See, real combat is about flow, about reading your opponent, about being ready to strike from any position." He demonstrated a subtle defensive stance, his trained body shifting with practiced precision. This poor guy has been drilled so hard on ceremony that they've trained all the fighting instinct out of him. The tourists around them had begun to take notice, some looking uncomfortable as Marcus's commentary grew louder. A family from Ohio quietly moved their children to a different viewing area, the parents exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their disapproval. "You know what we're really looking at here?" Marcus gestured toward Rowan, as though presenting evidence to a jury. "The difference between performance and combat effectiveness. These guards are actors, not fighters. Every move I make is designed for one purpose, winning actual fights. He executed a series of quick shadowboxing combinations, stopping just short of the ceremonial barrier. I've trained with Special Forces guys, Navy SEALs, Marines, fresh out of combat zones. And you know what they all have in common? They move like fighters, not like statues. Master Sergeant Chen had moved closer now, his civilian clothes unable to hide the military bearing that 30 years of service had embedded in his posture. The combat infantry badge pinned to his jacket lapel caught the morning light, a decoration that spoke of real battles fought and genuine sacrifices made. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out, assuming the role of an impromptu instructor, "what you're witnessing here is exactly what's wrong with traditional military thinking. These guards represent an outdated approach to security. All show, no substance." His training partners had positioned themselves strategically around the viewing area, creating what martial artists would recognize as a demonstration space. Their matching shirts and coordinated movement turned the solemn memorial into an impromptu classroom, with Marcus as the self-appointed teacher. "This is Jake." Marcus gestured to a tall, lean man with tape around his wrists. "Three-time national kickboxing champion. And Tommy here." He nodded toward a heavily muscled man with a fighter's scarred knuckles and former Golden Gloves boxer and current MMA instructor. "We train fighters who win real competitions, not ceremonial soldiers who win costume parades." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle of Marcus's demonstration. A group of middle school students on a field trip watched with wide eyes, their teacher looking increasingly concerned. An elderly woman wearing a Gold Star Mother's pin shook her head in quiet disapproval, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Watch how a real fighter positions himself," Marcus instructed, moving through a series of combat stances that showcased years of training. Every movement has tactical purpose, nothing wasted on ceremony, everything focused on combat effectiveness. This is what peak physical conditioning looks like when it's actually designed for fighting. Master Sergeant Chen had begun making his way through the crowd, his military bearing naturally parting the onlookers. His face betrayed growing concern, not for Rowan's safety, but for what might happen if the guard was forced to respond to escalating provocation. "The fundamental problem with military training," Marcus projected his voice like a seminar leader, "is that it prioritizes following orders over individual excellence. These guys are taught to be part of a machine, not to be elite fighters." He moved closer to the barrier, his movements becoming more aggressive. "In my system, we develop personal combat mastery. We create warriors, not wind-up toys." Marcus executed a spinning kick that came dangerously close to the ceremonial space, close enough that several tourists gasped and took involuntary steps backward. The sound of his foot cutting through the air was audible even from a distance. "Notice he doesn't even react," Marcus said, with mock admiration. "That's not discipline, folks. That's programming. The kind of mental conditioning that makes soldiers predictable and vulnerable." He positioned himself directly in front of the barrier, hands on hips, studying Rowan's impassive face. In real combat, this level of rigidity gets you killed. A woman with 2 young children grabbed their hands and began leading them away from the scene. "This isn't appropriate," she said, loudly enough for others to hear. "We're leaving." Several other families followed their example, uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "I think we need a practical demonstration here," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in training halls. Theory is educational, but nothing teaches like hands-on experience. He began stretching his shoulders and neck with practiced efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you why static defense, the kind these guards are trained in, is fundamentally useless against modern combat techniques." Master Sergeant Chen moved forward, with urgent purpose now, but Marcus's assistants smoothly positioned themselves to block his path. Jake, the kickboxing champion, placed a hand on Chen's chest with casual authority. "Easy there, Pops," he said, his tone conversational, but his intent unmistakable. "Just an educational demonstration. No harm done." Chen's eyes hardened. "That guard isn't what you think he is," he said quietly. his voice carrying the weight of experience. Your friend is about to make a very serious mistake. Marcus had begun an elaborate warm-up routine, rolling his shoulders and adjusting his stance with the precision of someone preparing for serious combat. The most dangerous myth in military culture, he lectured while loosening his joints, is that tradition equals effectiveness. These guards look impressive standing there, but they've sacrificed real combat skills for ceremony. For my final demonstration, Marcus announced, his voice taking on the quality of a championship fight announcer, I'm going to show you exactly what happens when outdated military training meets modern martial arts technique. He moved into his competition stance, his body shifting into what trained observers would recognize as a setup for a powerful finishing move. In actual combat, maintaining awareness is everything. This guard has surrendered his tactical awareness to ceremony. Marcus began a complex approach sequence, the kind used to set up tournament-winning strikes. His training has made him a target, not a defender. The crowd had fallen completely silent now, sensing that something irreversible was about to happen. Several people had backed away entirely, while others seemed frozen in place, unable to look away from the approaching collision between arrogance and tradition. A defender who can't adapt, Marcus declared, his movements accelerating into the fluid combination that had won him multiple championships, who won't respond to changing tactical situations, who remains locked into obsolete protocols. He launched into a blindingly fast series of moves, each flowing into the next with years of practiced precision. The final technique was a spinning heel kick aimed directly at Rowan's face. Has already lost. The impact echoed across the memorial like a gunshot. Marcus's heel connected solidly with Rowan's jaw, a blow that should have dropped any man instantly. The force was enough to snap most people's heads back, to send them crumpling to the ground unconscious. But Rowan didn't fall. The kick snapped his head to the side, and a thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, but his boots remained planted. His ceremonial rifle stayed at exactly the same angle. His body absorbed the blow with the resilience of someone who had endured far worse in places whose names didn't appear on tourist maps. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by absolute silence. Time seemed to stretch and slow as Marcus recovered his balance, a triumphant smile beginning to form on his lips. And that, he started to announce to the stunned audience, is why traditional military... His words died as he registered what was happening in front of him. Rowan hadn't just remained standing. His head had turned back to face Marcus directly. The guard's eyes, now locked onto Marcus's for the first time, showed no pain, no shock, only a cold, focused clarity that experienced fighters would recognize immediately as the look of someone shifting from defensive to offensive mode. "Oh shit," Tommy whispered, the confidence evaporating from his voice. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, nothing moved. The crowd held its collective breath. Master Sergeant Chen had stopped trying to push through Marcus's bodyguards, his expression shifting from concern to something closer to grim anticipation. Then Rowan moved. It wasn't the clumsy response of a ceremonial figure caught off guard. It was the precise economical motion of someone who had engaged actual enemies in actual combat. His rifle clattered to the stone as Rowan closed the distance between himself and Marcus with a speed that defied his formal bearing. Marcus, to his credit, recognized the danger immediately and shifted into a defensive stance. "Now we're talking," he said, but the confidence in his voice had hollowed out completely. "Let's see what they actually teach you, toy soldiers." The guard's response cut off Marcus's taunt with devastating efficiency. It wasn't showy or elaborate. Just a textbook, perfect combat technique, delivered with the controlled violence of someone who had applied such moves in life or death situations. Marcus blocked instinctively, his tournament reflexes responding before his brain could process what was happening, but the impact still sent him staggering backward. Rowan didn't speak, didn't posture, didn't play to the crowd. He moved with the focused intensity of someone executing a tactical response rather than performing for spectators. His expression remained professionally neutral, even as he systematically dismantled the martial artist's defenses with clinical precision. Marcus attempted a counterattack, launching a combination that had won him 3 separate championship titles. Rowan deflected the strikes with minimal effort, and in one decisive motion took the champion to the ground. The impact knocked the wind from Marcus's lungs, his eyes widening with the sudden, humbling realization that he was completely outclassed. Staff Sergeant Rowan maintained his position, one knee precisely placed on Marcus's chest. Enough pressure to immobilize, but not injure. The martial artist's surprise had given way to a competitor's instinct to escape, but each attempt to regain advantage was met with subtle adjustments that rendered his extensive training ineffective. "Stay down," Rowan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of command rather than anger. "This is over." Master Sergeant Chen stepped forward, Marcus's assistants no longer attempting to block his approach. "I believe," he addressed the martial artist with military precision, "you've just received a practical education in the difference between sport fighting and combat operations." Marcus struggled uselessly against Rowan's hold. "What the hell? You can't just—" "Staff Sergeant Rowan can do considerably more than he's currently demonstrating," Chen cut him off, his tone conversational, but edged with steel. Before his assignment to Tomb Guard duty, he served 2 combat deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and a combat infantry badge. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. "The ceremonial duties you've been mocking are assigned to soldiers who've already proven themselves in actual combat." The crowd had reformed at a safer distance, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Arlington Cemetery security personnel were approaching rapidly across the memorial grounds, their radios crackling with urgent communications. "Rangers?" Jake repeated, his previous bravado completely evaporated. "Those guys are not to be underestimated," Chen finished for him. "Quite correct." Rowan maintained his position, his breathing controlled, and even despite the brief but intense confrontation, the thin line of blood from Marcus's kick had traced a path down his chin, but his expression remained professionally detached. The same focus he'd maintained during night operations in Afghanistan when the consequences of losing focus were measured in lives rather than points. "Every soldier assigned to Tomb Guard duty," Chen continued, addressing not just Marcus but the gathered tourists, "is an active duty serviceman with combat experience and extensive military training. The discipline you mistook for weakness, Mr. Kane, is the same discipline that keeps them effective in situations where your tournament training would prove not just inadequate, but fatal." Marcus had stopped struggling, a new awareness dawning in his eyes as he processed what Chen was telling him. He moved like, "I didn't expect actual combat training." "No, you wouldn't have," Chen nodded grimly. "Competition fighting and military operations develop entirely different skill sets. Your techniques are impressive in controlled environments with rules and referees. Staff Sergeant Rowan's training is designed for environments where the only rule is completing the mission and bringing your people home alive." Cemetery security had arrived now, surrounding the scene with professional efficiency. Their supervisor, assessing the situation at a glance, approached Master Sergeant Chen with respectful recognition. "Master Sergeant, sir, we'll handle this from here." Chen nodded. "I believe Staff Sergeant Rowan has the situation well in hand, Lieutenant. Mr. Kane here decided to test the combat readiness of our Tomb Guards in a rather direct fashion." The security supervisor's expression hardened as he took in the scene. The blood on Rowan's face, the martial artist pinned to the ground. "That's assault on a federal officer, sir. Multiple felony charges." "Indeed it is," Chen agreed. "I suspect the U.S. Attorney's Office will take a very dim view of someone attacking a soldier at the tomb of the unknown soldier." Rowan looked to the security supervisor for instruction. At a subtle nod, he released his hold on Marcus, rising to his feet with the same fluid precision that had characterized his response. He stepped back, resuming a position of military attention despite the obvious signs of the confrontation. The tourists had formed a respectful circle around Master Sergeant Chen, their phones forgotten as they absorbed the reality of what they had witnessed. The retired soldier stood with bearing that 30 years of service had embedded in his bones, ready to explain what most civilians never understood about the men who guarded America's most sacred military site. The uniform these guards wear, he gestured toward Rowan, who had resumed his post with perfect composure despite the thin line of blood still visible on his face, isn't a costume. It's recognition of exceptional service. Every man selected for the tomb guard duty has already distinguished himself in regular military service. A teenager in the crowd raised his hand tentatively. But why have them just standing there if they're real soldiers? Seems like you're wasting their training. Chen's smile held patient understanding. That's a common misconception that reveals how little most people understand about military service. These ceremonial duties rotate among active duty soldiers. The man standing guard today might have been conducting patrol operations in Afghanistan last year and could deploy to a combat zone next year. He gestured toward Rowan with profound respect. Their ceremonial stillness isn't their primary capability. It's simply one expression of the discipline that makes them effective in all aspects of their service. The security supervisor who had taken Marcus into custody returned, approaching Chen with military courtesy. Master Sergeant, Mr. Kane is being processed for federal assault charges. Given the public nature of the incident and the assault on Staff Sergeant Rowan, the charges are quite serious. Chen nodded approvingly, as they should be. Attacking a serviceman on duty at Arlington National Cemetery is not something the military justice system takes lightly. He's requesting to speak with Staff Sergeant Rowan, the supervisor added, his tone neutral, but his expression skeptical. Claims he wants to apologize. Chen glanced toward Rowan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod while maintaining his ceremonial bearing. I believe that can be arranged once his shift concludes, Chen responded, though I suspect Staff Sergeant Rowan's commanding officer will have the final say on that matter. What Mr. Kane failed to understand, what many civilians understandably don't recognize, is that military excellence isn't measured by the same standards as competitive sports. In competition, success is defined by defeating opponents within established rules. In military service, success is defined by mission completion under conditions where rules are secondary to survival and protecting others. He gestured to Rowan's uniform, now slightly disheveled from the confrontation. The discipline you see in these guards, the ability to stand motionless for hours, to maintain perfect composure, regardless of provocation, isn't separate from their combat training. It's an extension of it. The same mental control that allows a soldier to remain still while being harassed by tourists is what allows them to remain calm and effective under enemy fire. A middle-aged woman near the front of the crowd spoke up, her voice carrying genuine curiosity. But why didn't he respond immediately? When that man started getting aggressive, he just took that kick without moving. An excellent question, Chen replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had both followed and issued such orders. Military regulations establish very specific criteria for when a guard may break ceremony and respond to a threat. They are trained to exercise maximum restraint, to distinguish between annoying behavior and genuine danger. His explanation carried the weight of decades of experience. Staff Sergeant Rowan demonstrated that restraint perfectly. He responded only when directly assaulted, and even then, his response was precisely calibrated to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary harm. A young medic from the cemetery staff approached with a first aid kit. After a brief exchange with Chen, she moved toward Rowan, who maintained his position as she carefully cleaned the blood from his face. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward. Throughout the process, his discipline unbroken even during this necessary medical attention. To serve as a tomb guard, Chen continued once the medic had finished, is considered one of the highest honors in military service. These soldiers are selected not just for their ceremonial precision, but for their exceptional service records. The dress blue uniform and white gloves aren't costumes. They're recognition of excellence that's already been proven in far more demanding circumstances. His expression grew more serious. If Mr. Kane had bothered to research before his demonstration, he might have discovered that many of these guards have combat decorations, and service records that would make his tournament trophies look like participation ribbons. 2 hours later, Staff Sergeant Micah Rowan emerged from the Tomb Guard quarters in his standard duty uniform, rather than ceremonial dress blues. The base medical officer had thoroughly examined the impact site, noting with professional approval how Rowan's trained reflexes had minimized what could have been serious facial trauma. "You rolled with the impact perfectly," the doctor had commented while checking for signs of concussion. "Textbook defensive reaction that probably saved you from a broken jaw." Rowan had simply nodded. The instinct to minimize impact damage had been drilled into him during countless hours of combatives training that emphasized survival over spectacle, mission completion over individual glory. The medical assessment confirmed what he already knew. No significant injury from Marcus's kick, just superficial bruising that would fade within days. He'd endured far worse during Ranger training, let alone during his deployments to places whose names were classified. Inside the security office, Marcus Kane sat alone, his athletic wear now wrinkled, his championship confidence replaced by the sobering reality of federal charges and the humbling experience of being so thoroughly outmatched by someone he dismissed as ceremonial. When Rowan entered, Marcus stood immediately, his entire demeanor transformed from arrogant challenger to respectful, almost deferential presence. "Staff Sergeant Rowan," the security supervisor nodded. "Mr. Kane has been formally charged with assault on a federal officer, but he requested this conversation before transport to federal custody." Rowan's nod was professional, neither friendly nor hostile. "Understood. I'll be right outside," the supervisor added, stepping out and closing the door behind him. For a long moment, the two men regarded each other in silence, the martial arts champion and the soldier, each recognizing something in the other that had been obscured by assumptions and arrogance. "That was Ranger training, wasn't it?" Marcus finally asked, his voice quieter than before, stripped of all performative quality. "I've sparred with some military guys before, but nothing like what you just did." "We train for mission completion under adverse conditions," Rowan replied simply, neither confirming nor denying the specifics of his military background. Marcus's laugh held no humor. "Mission completion, right." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you sit for a minute? I'd like to talk, if that's okay." Rowan took the offered seat, his posture remaining military straight, even in this informal setting. "Go ahead." "I completely screwed up out there," Marcus admitted bluntly. "Totally misjudged what I was looking at. When I saw you standing guard, I saw—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "A target," Rowan finished for him. "Someone you could use to make a point." Marcus nodded, genuine shame crossing his face. "That's exactly it. In my world, everything's about proving you're better than the competition, demonstrating superior technique." He looked down at his hands that had won championships but had proven completely ineffective against Rowan's disciplined response. "I didn't understand what I was actually challenging." "Most civilians don't," Rowan replied, his voice neutral but not unkind. "That's intentional." "The stillness," Marcus said, looking up again. "I thought it was just ceremony, just meaningless tradition. But it's actually operational discipline, isn't it?" "Control," Rowan confirmed. "The same control that allows us to stand motionless for hours in all weather allows us to make life or death decisions under extreme stress without panicking." Marcus nodded slowly, processing this revelation. "In competition, everything I do is designed to be seen, to score points and impress judges. What you did out there—" He shook his head. There was nothing flashy about it, just effective. "Different missions require different training," Rowan said, echoing Chen's earlier words. "My job isn't to win trophies or impress audiences. It's to honor the fallen and protect the sanctity of their resting place." "They're going to prosecute me to the full extent, aren't they?" Marcus asked, glancing toward the door where federal authorities waited. "Most likely," Rowan confirmed without emotion. "Assault on a soldier at Arlington National Cemetery is considered an extremely serious offense." Marcus accepted this with surprising dignity. I deserve whatever comes next. I earned it the moment I decided that place was my personal demonstration platform. He straightened in his chair, making a visible effort to face his situation with some measure of honor. For what it's worth, I'm genuinely sorry. Not just for the kick, but for the disrespect before that, for treating something sacred like it was my personal training gym. Rowan studied him for a moment, assessing the sincerity of the apology. Whatever he saw apparently satisfied him, because he gave a single, precise nod. Acknowledged. As Rowan stood to leave, Marcus spoke again. One last question, if you don't mind. When I kicked you, that should have dropped anyone. You barely moved. How do you train for that? Rowan paused at the door, his expression unchanging, but something approaching professional respect entering his voice. When you've been in firefights where your brothers' lives depend on you keeping your head, a kick to the face is just another Tuesday. He left without waiting for a response, returning to his unit and his duties with the same disciplined precision that had characterized his entire response to the incident. Behind him, Marcus Kane remained seated, facing the humbling realization that there were different kinds of strength in the world, and that he had spent years mastering only the most superficial variety. The next morning, Staff Sergeant Rowan stood at his post at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his dress blues immaculate, his bearing unchanged. The slight bruising along his jawline was barely visible beneath his military bearing. Tourists who approached now did so with a different kind of respect, their voices lower, their behavior more reverent. Master Sergeant Chen, making his regular visit to his brother's grave, paused to observe the guard and the respectful distance maintained by the visitors. He smiled slightly, nodding in satisfaction before continuing on his way. Sometimes, he reflected, the most effective lessons about honor weren't taught through words but through actions that revealed the true character of those who serve. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have recognized the difference between ceremonial duty and ceremonial weakness? Or would you, like so many others, have mistaken stillness for vulnerability? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new about the soldiers who guard our nation's most sacred sites. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind military service, and hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload our next video. Make sure to check out our previous videos appearing on your screen right now, and we'll see you again tomorrow at the same time with another powerful story.